In my last video, we looked at all the tools needed for making models. Now you don't need to watch that one to watch this one because they'll still make sense in any order. So let's investigate the best options for clipping and cleaning the parts and the different ways we can build our models so we can actually paint them. Let's get them off that mountain of shame and at least get them built. Welcome to the State of Play. I'm Will, and I figured there's so much information kicking around YouTube now, so many hobby methods or techniques to choose from, and well, I think we should all try them all. But seriously, I totally over-anticipated how long it takes to put these damn models together. It's taken me over a month of hobby time to get these done. Way more time than they obviously spent in a brainstorm coming up with female custodes. Who thought that would be a good idea? They must have known this would split the fan base. Nothing splits an audience than shoehorning in a retcon of the long-established lore at the 11th hour. Today we're going to continue assembling our backlog of models, so first let's talk about getting parts off a sprue. So there's 4 possible ways of getting parts off a sprue. The first one is to twist and snap them off. Don't do this. I fully admit to doing this when I was 10 years old because I didn't know any better and couldn't afford any decent clippers. I broke quite a few skeleton bones doing this, but convinced myself that they were battle damaged and bones were fragile anyway, so it didn't really matter. Since then I got an education and developed common sense. The second way is to use a sharp scalpel, but again, don't do this. There's far too much danger in pressing too hard and accidentally nicking or cutting through the part by accident. Or worse, stab yourself in the hand. And I can deal with that better than I can deal with a broken model. Realistically, however, no sane person is going to use methods 1 and 2. This leaves 2 ways of using clippers. Yes, 2 ways. And the way you choose boils down to one simple question. Do you know exactly how sharp your clippers are? It's best to test somewhere on the sprue. They don't stay sharp forever. If you're absolutely certain they're super sharp and will give you a clean cut, then cut the piece off as close to the part as you possibly can. Clippers will have a flat side, and that's the side you want resting as close to the part as possible. There are a few types of clippers to consider. They're not all the same. I certainly realised that after finally upgrading to these things. It's like night and day compared to my previous Tamiya ones. You've got single-bladed, double-bladed and angled ones like cuticle cutters. Now, I can't tell you which you'll prefer because you have to cut with them to find out, but effectively double-bladed ones will cut through both sides at the same time. Single-bladed ones have a blade on one side only and make almost no sound at all when cutting. And the cheaper cuticle cutter types should really be used to cut the sprue further out and then you tidy up after, because these aren't flat on any side. Try to cut it at an angle that's going to leave the least amount of plastic on that part, usually perpendicular. So on this part here, I'm going to move the clippers around until it ends up as flat as possible with the bit I'm removing. With luck, that part will come off with very minimal sanding to do. It'll probably leave a tiny bit of plastic whether you want it to or not, but we can clean that later. If you're not certain your clippers are top notch, then cut the part off further away from the part. Sometimes it's even worth cutting through the entire sprue if it's really fiddly. This is where some oversized clippers come in handy. Probably those Citadel ones you bought before you realised they were just too big for small parts. Sometimes you just can't get at the part. Doesn't matter how many times you swing your clippers around, reorient them or try to wiggle them into place. You're not getting that part off the easy way. Here, your only option is to attack the sprue further out and tidy up once you got the part out. And once it's off, take a very sharp scalpel and remove the excess. Yeah, you'll always hear that you should cut away from yourself for safety, which is solid advice, but with models this small, it's sometimes totally unrealistic because you don't have any control. Holding a scalpel like this and using your whole hand to be slow and precise is way safer than cutting randomly away from you. We're tidying miniatures, not peeling carrots. You might be looking at me right now and thinking, what a load of pointless extra work, like pressure washing the underside of your car. Now watch someone in the comments tell me they always wash the underside of their car. What can happen with clippers that may be a little blunted is they squash the plastic rather than cut it. This essentially tears the plastic out of the part, leaving a little crater shaped like this. 2 gouged sides and a squashed center. This just spoils your model. You'll either have to fill it, sand off a load of extra material, or ignore it. If you're slap chopping, you can't ignore it, because that dry brush will catch everything and make it stand out like the only kid dressed as Voldemort at a Harry Potter party. Many of these models are now getting very good at covering these areas up during assembly, as one part will often fit over another and hide it, but that's not always the case. It's a lot easier to sand a bit that sticks out than fill a crater caused by bad snipping. I wouldn't really mind, but as I said in my previous video, some of these connectors are now in super annoying places. The one at the bottom of the foot, great. This one right here on the thigh, pain in the butt. Now you can cleanly cut off the parts, it's time to start assembling, yes? Not yet, because you still have to tidy up the parts. Everybody seeing why this is my least favourite part of the hobby yet? At this point, there's two schools of thought for tidying up the parts. Sand and tidy each part as you cut it off, or assemble, then sand the model as a whole. There isn't really a right or wrong answer, as it's personal preference. I tend to sand and tidy as I go because I know it's done, and I don't have to scan over the whole model at the end and maybe miss bits, only to find rogue mold lines after I've primed. Because man, that really sticks in your throat. There's going to be two kinds of things to clean up: sprue nubs and mold lines. Now, we've already talked about sprue nubs, as that's the point where it was connected to the sprue. Provided you didn't end up making a crater, you can just use a sharp scalpel to carefully remove what's sticking out, then give it a gentle sand with your file to smooth it off. Like playing a violin. Well, how I imagine playing a violin, because I've never tried. Mold lines, named because little bits of excess plastic can form when the model is squeezed into its mold, are long thin lines of plastic like seams ironed into a weirdo's jeans. These will need to be scraped or sanded off. If it's not too prominent, sometimes you could just paint your plastic glue over it to melt it down flat, but not always. You could buy that Citadel mold line remover tool, but to be honest, it's far too big and clunky to use in most cases, and feels more like trying to spread hard butter on fresh bread. You know what I mean, when the bread just starts tearing itself apart like it was being buttered by Wolverine. It's far easier to scrape those off with the back of a scalpel, or for stubborn parts, use the actual blade. That is until you come across a mold line that runs down a concertina tube. One of these. You're on your own with that one. Either you spend half an hour cleaning it, or you make a cup of tea whilst convincing yourself that those pipes would have mold lines in the real world anyway. Having said all this, newer models are getting really good at not having many mold lines, but on older kits, yes, you'll be scraping your way to that old world army. Sorry. Okay, now we can start assembling. No. You see, this is always the time I used to go wrong, for me. I'd open the instructions at page 1 and start, and only halfway through I'd realise I could have kept some parts separate to make it quicker and easier to paint. Even something as simple as leaving the head off a model can make your life easier. I've never subscribed to priming a head in black to paint any skin tone. If you look in the mirror and see deep black shadow areas on your skin, you need a doctor. Or you're about to come back from the dead. Even more so now that contrast and speed paints make painting a head infinitely quicker in one coat, with highlights. If you really don't care and want to make the model in its entirety, then ignore this and carry on, but as models have become a lot more nuanced and complex, I found myself following a different approach. First, I'll scan the box art for any areas that jump out as difficult to reach. Some models will have them, some won't. And again, I'll reiterate that this is all dependent on how you want to prime and paint. If you prime black or a dark colour, then you might not care if you can get to those areas because you can just say it's in shadow. But if you were, say, maybe using speed paints over a lighter coloured primer, then those impossible to reach bits are going to stand out like a ham sandwich at a vegan dinner party. This guy here has an arm and a bunch of hair that is totally going to get in the way of painting his stomach area, especially if he's glued to a base. It would be harder to paint both of these if the models were glued to the transports, and huge chunks of this would be difficult if it was glued to a base. So the second thing to do is scan through the instructions first, both backwards and forwards, to see if there's a way to not glue those parts on. Sometimes it isn't immediately obvious and you'll have to start assembling and testing how parts fit without glue, called dry fitting. Not to be mistaken for buying a tailored wetsuit. Dry fitting lets you try before you buy, so to speak, so you can find out early what may or may not get in the way of your brush, or even if it's really going to be that much of an issue at all. Let's take this guy. Usheran Mortark of Delusion. This is a fantastic model in an incredibly dynamic pose, arguably top contender for Model of the Year in my opinion. But let's face it, huge areas of this model are going to be a royal pain to paint fully assembled and glued to a base. Scanning through the instructions and referring back to the box art, I can see that it might be possible to make the body as one section, the cloak as one section, the fur coat as a section, and the head as a separate part. And the base can totally be left separate, even though part of it is attached to the cloak, because he just glues on top. But there are some question marks over ease of painting this goblet, this shoulder armor and scepter combo, and this single shoulder guard here, so let's have a go and see where we get. More often than not, it's advantageous to put more glue than you need and use that to squish the parts together. The excess glue squeezes out and helps melt any gaps together, and you can also run a glue brush along the joint itself, which helps meld the seam together. Don't worry about all the shiny glue patches when building, as once it's primed, it'll be like it never happened and they were never there. Like having Kevin Spacey at a party. Allegedly. Right, so in the end, I'm left with these individual parts. Great, but if I prime these as separates, I'm going to end up spraying the areas where the glue joins are. I just can't recommend doing that at all because it can play havoc with the incredibly toleranced parts when gluing. I did it once before and realised that even a tiny layer of paint threw the entire model out of whack, and I ended up gap filling loads of areas that wouldn't have needed it otherwise. This is where I use the most underrated tool in our hobby arsenal, the miracle that we call glue tack, poster tack or sticky tack around the world. I'm going to use very tiny amounts of this to fully assemble the model, putting tiny bits on the edges where the glue would be. I glue tack it now, but later I might choose to glue it. To me it just seems counterintuitive to reduce my options at this stage by immediately gluing a model to a base. Unless the model has super tiny feet that would make it really hard to hold in any other way. And if there's any way at all to not glue a gun across a body, I'm going to take it. You can see pretty much everything behind that gun, especially when looking down on a model during a game. Probably the way tall guys feel when talking to a woman in the hot summer months. Most of these gun arms now connect on a shoulder and at a hand, so just glue tack it for priming, pull it off to paint the chest, then glue it back on at the end. This will allow me to prime the model, zenithal prime the model, or airbrush the model without getting paint on any of the glue joints. But it still lets me take it apart again for easier painting. Now the other benefit of this is it'll show which areas you don't need to bother painting, because if the primer didn't hit it, it'll never be seen, and I don't need to waste my time painting it. And here's Usheran, Mortark of Delusion, looking like he's fully assembled, when in actual fact he's temporarily held together with putty and potential. All these complex models are held together in sub-assemblies with glue tack, ready for priming, so I can take them apart again and refresh the parts that other brushes can't reach. If you choose to slap chop your model, then this works too. Glue tack it for priming and then disassemble for a much easier and more covering slap chop. Just remember to dry brush in the right direction to get the highlights in the same place on each part. There is another category of model which are push fit models. These can be assembled using the exact same process, only with these you can pull them apart easier. I would recommend snipping a little bit of the connector and giving the end a super quick sand. This makes it much easier to push the parts together, and you can add a little bit of glue to the sections if you don't need to take it apart again. But these push fit models aren't usually as complex anyway, so making sub-assemblies with these will come down to personal preference, because getting your brush around is often way easier. Bases getting in your way might be your only issue with these. Now listen, of course, you don't have to do any of this. You can just assemble your model fully and get on with it. It totally depends how you want to paint. Sometimes sub-assemblies don't speed up the work. Sometimes they do. But looking at box art, I can't believe some models were painted fully assembled. I'm willing to be proved wrong, but they're either an excellent Photoshop job, or the painter has an Ant-Man suit to get into places no brush would go. Next time I'm going to look at priming, because again, I have thoughts on how that's changed massively over the years. And thank you for letting me build a bunch of models today for this video. It's been over a year since I have, and I surprised myself by actually enjoying it. No, I'm only kidding, it's still my most despised part of the hobby. If you're looking for any hobby product recommendations, tips and tricks, or mini painting books, you can find them on my website at thestateofplay.co.uk. And feel free to join my Patreon, where you can chat directly with me, and I can hopefully answer any questions you might have. Thanks to all my fantastic patrons, and that's the State of Play for today. I'll catch you next time.